Welcome to the SaaS AdLab podcast, where we interview the source of SaaS founders, entrepreneurs, and CEOs. My name is Luis. I'm the founder of Fantôm agency, a digital marketing agency specialized in scaling SaaS companies. And today I have the pleasure of interviewing Paul. He is the CEO over at Physna. First of all, thanks so much for being on here. It's a pleasure having you. And to get started, right, why don't you just kind of like dive into, firstly, a little bit of your background, and then just tell us how things happened in a way for you to be in the position to start Physna.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me. So my background is I grew up in the Midwest, was homeschooled for most of it. Went to college kind of young because I got to pick what I wanted to focus on, being homeschooled. And it's a long story. I'll kind of speed through. Went to Harvard for a little bit, went over to Europe, spent some time there, learned German, decided to study over in Germany, switched from physics, especially astrophysics and astronomy, into law. It's a long story.
Interesting.
Reasoning behind it was I've always been fascinated by technology and science, and I just kind of I thought, look, the biggest way for me to make an impact isn't being an individual contributor maybe, but by leading a company. So I thought I'm going to try to build a startup. And I definitely had a lot of respect for education. So I wanted to make sure that I got a degree of some sort. For me personally, that meant something pretty substantial at the time. And I kind of narrowed it down to, well, if I'm going to go into business, I probably should either do business or law. And I thought, well, what's the weirder one? Maybe that's more useful. So yeah. I did law, and that was a hard thing to do in a foreign language, but it worked out. And I was able to kind of support myself by having little companies, little startups along the way. And through law, kind of realized that there was a big problem in intellectual property, and that problem had to do with the fact that 3D data was not being comprehended correctly or universally in a normalized way by computers. Yeah. And what that meant was, you couldn't prevent patent infringement from happening. We were reactionary, not preventative, because we couldn't catch 3D models being duplicated or being used in another 3D model. So the way to solve that actually became more and more apparent because of the short stint that I had in the world of science, specifically physics, astrophysics, some of the mathematics that you learn and some of the principles they use. So we started off focusing on that use case, but right now Physna, which is short for physical DNA, so like the DNA of things, if you will, it allows us to break down this patent technology, or patent pending technology, I should say. It's all, being protected all over the world, over 120 countries. And what's really cool about this technology is that it allows us to take 3D data, like real world data of any kind, and to normalize that down to a way that your computer can understand. So it's kind of like the code of things is actually a better way to describe it. It's codifying the physical world so that the digital world can work with it. Mm-hmm. And there's an amazing number of applications for that. And the vast majority of the world's economy is based in physical goods, and it will be as long as we're physical people. Right. So bringing that technology for the physical world and bring it out of 2D into 3D, that has a lot of applications, and engineering automation, and supply chain automation, procurement automation, optimization, inventory management, but also in things like quality control, healthcare, inspection. I mean, it really goes on and on because, physical things go on and on and on. So there's quite a lot of use cases, but we're trying to be as narrowly focused as we can and really focusing on that core tech.
That's a lot of information. I feel like this is probably the company that's been most, for being a software company, you're the one that touches the physical world the most, I think, in a sense, but also the one that has, like, you can go super broad, I feel like. I'm not entirely sure how, but you can also go very, very narrow, right? So what are some of the, like, if you're talking about, I mean, you obviously mentioned, wanting to go very narrow into, I believe, into who you service. What are the companies, if you were to say, this is my dream client, who would that be and why?
We're very lucky in the sense that we already kind of work with, not all of, but a good number of our dream customers. And I honestly think, and when I say focus, I really mean on the core technology. And yes, initially, because we're a company, we do have to focus on a few core use cases. We can't sell 500 products of everyone in the world. Mm-hmm. What we're trying to do is build more of a platform. So what the technology isn't is it's not exclusively an application, right? So we do have an application layer. In other words, like, think of it like a web app or just a regular app. It allows you to basically take 3D data that you've worked with in the past and see how it can, how that relates to other 3D data. So it can make predictions about how much something would cost, if this part is found inside of something else, if something very similar to it already exists. Mm-hmm. And so that's very useful for engineers, and it cuts down on their, it actually speeds up their engineering productivity quite a bit by about, it increases it fourfold over. In other words, 500% the productivity of where they were before. So you're 5 times as productive with the technology actually as you are on average without it. For procurement, it gives you all the options. It says, these are the people who can provide these different parts. You're ordering 20 different parts and they're all the same thing. They just have different names. What it's really doing is bringing, where our focus is currently right now is taking industries that are in the biggest need of this technology, which is, I think things like, medical device companies, aerospace companies, automotive companies. There are even government agencies, involved as well that have very obvious needs when it comes to physical goods and understanding what things are and how they go together. But we're focusing in on those because they've been the most underserved for the longest time. If you look at the like CAD and PLM type markets, mm-hmm. They're only hitting maybe 1/5 of the potential audience because the products are very complicated, and people who develop physical things don't actually see it until it's manufactured. But if you're in the software world, everybody in your company is seeing your product months before it comes out live, but not in the physical world. So you're selling something you've never seen. We're trying to kind of fix that. But you're right, there's a lot of application for it. And so what we're trying to do is, instead of building an application, primarily we're working our way towards building this out to be a platform with APIs so that anyone can build an application using this core technology, and build their own app, that uses this to interact with the physical world more.
That's really cool. One of the questions that kind of sparked in my mind was, because you mentioned something about patent protection, right? So making sure that other people aren't stealing your patents for your designs and stuff like that. But doesn't that mean that every single patent that is created has to go through Physna for it to be able to be very accurate?
That's a wonderful question. It's a great question. So there are a few ways that you can go about fixing that. And you're right, that is actually a very major problem. And that was, again, this is the initial use case, it's not the main one right now, but it's still very much an active one. So the patent office doesn't have a lot of 3D models. They've got pictures and drawings and a lot of text, right? So the way that you bridge that gap is you want to get 3D data from everywhere that you possibly can, right? From people contributing, but also from publicly available sources, and just as much data as you possibly can gather. In addition to that, though, what you can get out of the patent office is, well, first of all, you've got the pictures or drawings, at least, of things, and then you've also got these long, complicated write-ups about what they are and how they work. The way that you bridge that gap, if you don't have 2 sets of 3D models, this is the one that is maybe the infringing model and this is the original, that's easy. We can do that all day long. That's really simple. The way that you fix that where 3D models are absent is by understanding through machine learning what a 3D model is, what its attributes are, what it's used for, understanding correlations between 2D pictures and 3D models, understanding even obscure ones, right? So if I take a picture of the bottom right-hand corner of something, knowing that that's actually the bottom right-hand corner of this CAD model, and that CAD model from this weird orientation, right, which traditional image recognition might not work very well for. And then being able to use that to find out more data, because the great thing about 3D data is that it's more data rich. Even if the file sizes are lighter, ironically, the amount of data you can learn from is several orders of magnitude higher. Right. So I can learn from 10 3D models, even if they're lightweight in file size, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of times what I could learn off of the same number of 2D pictures. Mm-hmm. And I could learn things that I could never learn off of 2D pictures. So that's kind of how you bridge that gap.
That's awesome. That's really cool. Now, to kind of switch gears here and talk a little bit more about the growth of the company, right? Obviously, there's the part where you came up with the idea to build it, but then the harder part, which is, how do you actually do everything and get it scaled and start, like you mentioned that you've already worked with some of your dream clients. So how do you go, right, from starting the company to getting in touch with the people that you want to talk to that that would be good clients and so on? So obviously, some of the people that listen to the podcast are either first-time founders or they want to start their own company. For example, if I wanted to do something like Physna, I wouldn't even know where to start, right? So just kind of like speak to that a little bit, to that part of the process.
Right. So every company is a little bit different. Our current focus area, we're working on something that's consumer facing, and that is sort of democratizing the technology that we're building for use cases for everybody, right? Which hasn't gone public yet, but it will very soon. In the meantime, though, for Physna's core product, which is more or less enterprise focused, right? We have some small companies that use it, that have only a handful of engineers, but most of them are very, very, very big companies and organizations. So it's really built out for to scale well in a large organization. And because of that, since that's the target, you have to be patient, and you have to do a lot of demos and go to, even though we can't right now because we're in the middle of this coronavirus thing. Normally, you would want to go to as many trade shows as you can. You want to meet people face to face. You need to just be willing to put yourself out there and be humble about it too. Say, look, this is what I've got. Tell me what you think. The reason that we found the use cases that we did that's not because, I would love to I would definitely not give myself credit for it. I would love to give my team credit for it, but frankly, where we really got the use cases was from talking to people who, worked in those industries, and they told us, this is what I could do with this technology. This is what I could do with this. I could use it for this, and I could do that, and this is the problem that I have. And if your technology can do this, then, oh my God, that fixes this problem. That's so much better, identifying the problem first and trying to think up a problem. There's three types of products in my mind. There are products that solve a solution that doesn't exist. They're a solution to a problem that doesn't exist, and that's a very hard company to run. That's not one that you want to run. Then there are companies that they have a product that's a solution to one problem. And those are easy to run, right? And not easy to run, but those are probably, most successful companies fit into that category. And then you've got the third category, where you've got the most opportunity for major growth, right? Lots and lots and lots of not only vertical, but horizontal scaling. But also a risk, which is when you have a solution to many problems, which is the bucket that I would say we fit into, because we found these problems. We didn't make them up. We weren't looking for them. And that one technology solves them all to varying degrees. So what we have to do is, the challenge here is the focus. And the first couple of years of the company, if I told you I knew exactly where to focus and exactly what to go after, I'd be the biggest liar ever. Every investor we have would laugh, because they know that we spent the first couple of years trying out 50 different things. And actually the cool thing was that we didn't have any, this is either cool or depressing depending on how you look at it. It wasn't really our ideas, but the algorithm was our ideas, right? Like the technology we thought up for a use case. But the other use cases weren't things that we necessarily thought up. We might have, helped work out kind of how it solves the problem, but we certainly didn't come up with the problem, obviously, with the people who presented to us. And we saw so many of them, we didn't know which one made the most sense. And they were all extremely lucrative. And I've been told so many times by so many people, if you don't go into this, you're an idiot. You're a moron if you don't go into this industry. Oh my God, this would be so useful here. You're a moron if you don't go. Like the thing is, I realized after a while, I'm a moron no matter what I do, according to most people. So, if I've got to be a moron, which sounds like the least moronic idea. And very often I was wrong. We tried to go into, at the very beginning, several different areas of application that we realized were just, they were lucrative and the technology worked, but the sales cycles were complicated because there were third parties that had to get involved to facilitate it working, because there was hardware that had to be brought in for these specific types of use cases, and they were really complicated. There were a lot of very complicated regulations around how to work with these in different areas, like in healthcare and stuff. It's complicated. So we realized after a while, let's leave those to the side. We kind of took a more holistic picture, and we said, okay, let's try to just think about things as broadly as possible, and let's narrow down, see if we can find a trend. And what we found, and we didn't make this up, this is something we've read and a lot of people have been talking about for years, is that you have the product life cycle, right? I've got an idea for something, I design something, I either procure it or have it built, and then I do quality control, and then after it's been in use for a while, I do inspections, and I realize, oh man, this could have been so much better if I did this other thing. And so I have another idea, which leads to that circle, right, is the product life cycle. And the second half of that product life cycle is harder than the first half, because you need things like 3D scanners, you need things like that. Now, our technology can handle that now. But when we were getting started, that was a lot of complexity to add into our baby software, dealing with all these other machines. So we decided at the beginning, let's just focus on the beginning of that, right? You've got an idea, you have a design, you have a CAD file. we don't need to worry about hardware. We don't have to worry about scanners and stuff, which today, again, it's not a problem. But back then it was. And that gives us some clarity on where to focus. So the hardest thing is, one, focusing and figuring out where to focus. The only way you can do that is by screwing up. I mean, no one knows intuitively. And everyone I talk to, even investors, and I won't name anybody, but especially, some of the earlier investors that we had, a lot of great, very, very intelligent people had very bad ideas, myself included, as far as having bad ideas, had bad ideas about where to focus first. And it's just, you have to have some exposure to it before you find out the truth. And then as far as how to get into these companies, if what you have is real and what you have is novel, you're not selling snake oil, you don't really have to try too hard to get their attention. What you have to be prepared for is the complexity of how long these deals take, and the sales cycle you have to go through, and the follow-ups, and the fact that you do 15 demos for any given company, even though you should have sold it after the first one, that wasn't the buyer, and now you got to go to IT people. So it's the complexity of the deal that takes up time. Right. But if you just get out there, talk to people, eventually, if you have something that's worth their time, they will find you in most cases.
What if, I guess right now, I don't necessarily know how cutting edge the technology is, but it seems like you're, if not the only one, you're one of the very few people that are doing this at a global scale. Mm-hmm. How much harder would it be if, say, I didn't have such a cutting edge technology and people were actually looking for the solution already, right? Like there was already demand, where it seems like in your case, you were pretty much creating all the demand by going to these trade shows, by meeting with prospects face to face and doing demos. How do you think that would have been any different for you?
If what we had already existed or it wasn't as novel, it would have been so much easier. Seriously, it would have been easier, much easier. The most complicated part of our sales cycle at Physna, and a lot of people say, "Oh, well, it's easy for you because you guys have something that no one's ever seen," and it's like, no, that just makes it hard, right? Because people try to put your product into a category, and it's always wrong, right? Mm-hmm. So one category that we keep hearing all the time is, "Oh, your shape search," right? Which is a tiny category in a tiny area, and does a very limited, very specific thing in a very specific way. It's like, well, you can search for shapes, and you can, yes. So in a way, yes, shape search. But the traditional shape search doesn't allow you to find parts within other parts. It doesn't allow you to see things that almost like and I'm using an analogy here, obviously, but like a DNA level. And it doesn't really let you do true machine learning because you have to normalize the data first. What traditional shape search does is it uses more traditional technology like 2D to 2D, uses like CNNs, like regular old machine learning for 3D models, and it finds similar whole 3D models. I can find that this class is similar to this class, right? But if there's a straw inside of it, I don't know that that's a straw. I think that's part of a glass, right? So there's a lot more complexity to what we do than those markets. So trying to differentiate. So the thing is that even though we're very, 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 very different from everybody, and that's why we have the intellectual property protection. Most people don't need to patent software or algorithms right now. It's a fool's errand, and I know that better than anyone. I'm an IP attorney, but we did it here because what we have is extremely different, and it took us a lot of money, and I skipped over many years of hardship and a lot of work and a lot of failure to get to where it actually worked. So we do have an advantage in the market right now, where we're at least a year or two ahead of anybody who's actively in or looking at this market, right? The best we can tell. I've got that on very good authority, that we're at least a year or two ahead right now. And we're trying to keep that edge, or grow that edge, I should say. But the hardest thing is that when you have something that where even the solution itself, let alone the underlying technology, is something that people aren't used to seeing, it's really hard. And it's kind of like, one of the better expressions, and I'm going to butcher it here because this isn't verbatim what he said, but it was something along the lines of, if I asked people what they wanted, it would have been a faster horse. This is Henry Ford. Right, he'd been in the car, right? So the thing is, when you come out with a car, people are like, okay. The funny thing is, in software, people will make comparisons, and they'll say, well, this horse is weird because it's, these legs are round, and it's like, well, they're not legs, they're wheels. They're like, whatever, they're legs. And it doesn't seem to like hay very much. And it's like, well, it doesn't take hay, it takes gas. And they're like, well, this horse is stupid. Like, no, it's not a horse. It's a car. And you have to explain. It's software. It's a little bit different, right? It's not as hands-on. So you have to explain it to them more. And that makes the sales cycle complicated because you're explaining. And then once they finally get it, you get this aha moment. and they're like, wow, I love it. It's faster and it doesn't require hay and it doesn't, it can't get sick, right? It's got all these advantages over a horse per se.
Right.
The problem is that, you in a bigger company, you'll get someone like that who becomes like almost this like, I don't mean this in a negative sense, I mean in a very positive sense. They become an ally almost to a fanatic level, right? Once they get that aha moment, the person that you dealt with at first now is like your biggest your biggest ally ever, and they're like they are just evangelizing your product extremely hardcore within the company. And then we've actually had that happen so many times that we've had companies where we almost lost a deal because they thought that we had bribed the person to go convince them to buy our technology. They actually told us, like, the thing that scares me most is that this guy won't shut up about it, and I don't know if he's got stock in your company or what. And I know that sounds a little bit braggy, but it's just, it's because they have that aha moment for themselves. They go see, oh, I finally get what this thing is. But now their boss, who has to sign off on it, is saying, so tell me why this stupid horse with round legs is any good. And why is this guy so excited about it, right? So that's the difficulty. If it was another horse, it'd be easier. Sure, it would be harder in some cases because you have competitors you have to worry about there, right? One thing that we're blessed with is very little competition right now. If there is competition, it's typically the competition.
They're 1 year behind.
They're a year behind, and so it's like we can beat them in any test if they really are competitors. But typically, like what we're competing with is the old way of doing things, and the old way of doing things is terrible. So we don't really have the kind of competitive concern that a lot of companies have, which is great. That's a huge relief. But we do have another very unique issue, which is explaining to people why this horse has round legs.
Explaining just the product itself. I think that's one of the biggest issues with software, especially when it's cutting edge. It's, how do I educate people when they don't even know what they're looking at? What are some of the ways that you guys do that? Especially, I think it's important to know, right? If you were used, like maybe there are some pivots that are currently taking place in whether it's marketing, how you're doing things right now, given the current situation where we can't go anywhere. But how are you educating people, say now, since you can't go to trade shows, since you can't go give a live demo or something like that?
It's a great question. Right now, so the honest answer, I wish I had something more profound and more useful for your audience, but I don't. I'm not going to lie. So right now we're lucky in the sense that we've got pent up demand, because we had a lot of companies that are already interested. We've got a fairly small team. We actually right now have a waiting list of customers to install this at. So yes, we're worried about COVID-19 and its impact, and I'm sure, and no one's, it's upsetting alone because of the human factor, of course, but also from a business standpoint, it is concerning because we don't know what impact that's going to have. But that's going to be a little bit longer down the road for us just because we've got so much momentum currently. So the fact that we're not out at trade shows and stuff like that, is it hurting us? Not now. Will it hurt us in the future? Maybe. It's hard to say right now because these sales cycles are complicated, they're long, and the product is evolving extremely quickly. So it's kind of hard to say.
Yeah, that's awesome. We'll switch to a little bit more about personal, type of questions regarding you being a founder, building the company and stuff like that. But what's one of the hardest things so far as, building a company, building a team? Maybe, I'm not entirely sure if you have a family or not. But, everything is, I personally think that there isn't really work-life balance. There's just, there's just life, and you have to make it work however you have it.
Yeah, so, perfectly said.
What is the situation in that sense?
So I actually love what you said, and it's a point that I like to make all the time, is that I actually hate the word balance because, it can be taken in different ways. But one of the ways of looking at it, and the way that it often gets misused, is people will say, I need this work-life balance. And really what they're saying is I need to half-ass both. So that I'm not going crazy. I'm like, no, that's awful, man. You should be all in about work and all in at family. And a lot of times it's like, okay, I can't do that. I'd be at work all the time. My family would never see me, or I'd be with my family all the time. I'd never go to work. And I'm like, that's not true. You can't, even if you didn't have a family, you couldn't work 24 hours a day without sleeping, without doing anything else, without recharging, without you starting to really be bad at your job. Right. So that's not true. And you also, if you had no work and nothing else to do, and, for whatever reason, and you could just spend all the time with your family, they would be pretty tired of you after a while. If you spent 24 hours, doing nothing but doting on them and spending every minute with in near proximity, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. They're going nuts after a while. So I think you don't need to balance. You can be really, really aggressive in both areas of your life. The thing I think is important is to obsess, be all in on whatever you care about. And that doesn't have to be family. It doesn't have to be business. It doesn't have to be anything in particular, but whatever it is for you, you should be obsessive about it. It makes life worth living. You only get one shot.
Right. I love it. I love it. If there are any SaaS companies out there that you look up to that you think, these people are just crushing everything that they're doing, which ones are those? Or if it's just one?
That's a good question. So I typically don't think in those terms. Sometimes I'll look at companies and I'll be like, wow, they did really well in this, or man, they're making a lot of money, or wow, they did this really well. But I don't really envy or copy any of them, even the really big traditional ones. And the reason for that is that I think that there's, what works for someone doesn't always work for somebody else. And I don't really like the idea of utilizing strategies before I know the goal. I think so. Let me explain what I mean by that. If you try to follow what somebody else does, even in just a cultural way, right? Mm-hmm. That can be a bad thing. So looking at them and thinking about what they're doing and using it for inspiration, wonderful. Absolutely should do that. We've got some great people on our team from amazing companies like, Google, for example, and they bring amazing experience and really good ideas into the company. And some of them, sure, yeah, we should totally do it exactly like they do. But looking at that and saying, oh, because Google or whoever does it this way, we should do it exactly that way. No, not at all. So I don't really look at any company and say, oh, they're crushing it and I want to be them, or I want to be like them. I just think, okay, these are some things they're doing well, and it's smarter than what I'm doing, so I should adopt it. But I think the way to think through it, instead of trying to adopt what people are doing from a day-to-day or from a planning perspective, is you have to set the goal for your company, and the goal for your company can't be the goal for somebody else's company. It's got to be, it's yours. It's hopefully a different company. You're not just copycatting somebody else, hopefully. So your goals are going to be different. And that means that the strategy's got to be different. And that's one thing that I think is the most important thing to remember as an entrepreneur, is that you should never take this, we're all trained and biased to think from, we start with the plan or the road, and then we end up at some random outcome or some, instead of planning from the goal and saying, well, if that's where I want to be in 5 years or 100 years or whatever, where do I need to be in 4 years, 3 years, 2 years, 1 year, tomorrow, today. So planning backwards like that is actually the right way to do it. What we're doing right now is quote unquote backwards, where we're thinking in the wrong direction. So I don't looking at those companies and saying, well, they're really crushing it, and trying to emulate them. Just because that's one way, it's one trap with the falling into, let's get focus on the path instead of the goal. And our goals are different, so we can't follow that exact same path. What works for them might not work for me. But if they're doing something that works for me, sure, you should absolutely consider adopting it, and but also realize that you have a great brain too. And if I told you every single thing that we do at Physna, and we spend the next 7 hours talking about it, and you decide, I would think you were pretty stupid if you came back to your company and did verbatim the exact same thing the same way. Yeah. You got to put your own spin on it, because what's right for us is wrong for you.
Absolutely. Now, if you could go, let's say for whatever reason, and I'm interested in because you have an interesting way of looking at things, and I like it. So I'm interested in seeing what your answer to this is going to be. But if you could go back to, the first day when you started Physna, what would you tell yourself if you could do something differently?
I wouldn't do it, because you wouldn't learn. Here's the thing. There's the butterfly effect, right? Anything can affect anything anyway. And sure, I could go back and potentially become 10,000 times more successful. But I could also go back and totally ruin it, right? And the reason I wouldn't go back and tell myself something is because the most important lessons I've learned are the things I've done wrong. The things that I never did, and therefore don't know if they worked or not, I don't know if those are good ideas or bad ideas, because I haven't done them. So there's no lesson there at all. Things that I've tried and have not worked have been, even if it's painful, they've been really good, important, valuable lessons. Mm-hmm. So we got here where we are. We got where we are organically by taking every twist and turn and mistake that we had. Mm-hmm. So knowing that our path got us to where we are, and knowing that I have the ability right now with where we are to move us forward, I wouldn't go back in time and change something. That would rob me of what I needed the most, which is the lesson.
Right. I love it. Do you have a favorite book?
No.
No books. And
I love books, but I don't have a favorite.
Is there a book you recommend?
Many. 0 to 1 is a really good book.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good one. I think it's by Peter Thiel. The Happiness Advantage is a really good book. I love the psychology behind that. That's a really, really good book. Underrated, but you should definitely read it. There's the classics, that every person in business listens to. The books that I think as a genre make the most sense are ones that have to do with mindset. I get really bored with tactics and strategy books because, again, what works for one person doesn't work for everybody.
That same thing.
Yeah. And the thing is that mindset is 99%. I mean, I really believe in the 80-20 rule, not as a saying, but because it's actually a rule of nature, that there's mathematical principles behind the 80-20 rule, which we can get into a really nerdy conversation about if you wanted to, but we don't have time. So the 80-20 rule applies here too. 80% of your success is your mindset, and 20% at most is how you actually execute that. But if you actually look at how you're executing on a day-to-day basis, then how you go about getting there, 80% is the goal, and then having the right mindset, and 20% is the path and having the right strategies. Being able to deploy the right strategies is also going to have the 80-20 rule apply. You're going to have that strength of character and that mindset. So if you take the 80-20 rule and you apply it twice, you're down to 90, I think it's 96%, 94%, something like that. So only like around 4% or so of your success, or 8%, I forget the exact number, I have to do it again in my head. But like a very, very small, less than 10% of your success is going to be based off of is actually going to be based off of the strategies that you know and the techniques that you've learned. Not saying they don't matter, they totally do. But the reason mindset matters so much more is because to pick up a book about strategy, you have to have the right mindset. You'll never pick up that book, you'll never read it if you have the wrong mindset. So I think that keeping the right mindset and building that is much more important than learning any one particular strategy, because the strategies will come with the right mindset.
Yeah, love it. And Paul, where can people find you online?
Anywhere. I mean, you can go to LinkedIn and look me up there. You can go to Physna.com, Physna. And I'm sure if you fill out something there, you can get hold of me that way. But in general, I think the easiest way is LinkedIn.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for being on here today, Paul. It was a pleasure having you. I loved our conversation, and stay safe. And thanks for being on here. Appreciate it.
You too. Thanks for having me.
Take care. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.